what it taught me was to look at the guitar in a different way, and then to start to put together chords the way other instrumentalists would. Like a piano player, obviously, it's all laid out. It goes in one direction, not like the guitar, which is, going up and down and left and right. And it's very easy to see all your possibilities. You can basically just lean your forearm, on the keys, and you got yourself some harmony. Can't really do that on the guitar very easily, but I could. Let me see if I can get there's a clean sound of some sorts.
Yeah.
And that's just staying in key, you know what I mean? So, and then when you think, well, that's just if your audience is hearing E, well, then they're hearing Dorian, right?
Right.
But if they're hearing some other bass note, then they're hearing some other mode. And then, of course,
right.
And you realize that the heavens open up and the light shines down on you. You hear angels singing. Yeah. And the guy next to you goes, "What's the matter with you?" And you can't explain it to him. But yes. And then you start moving them around and you realize I could be like, McCoy Tyner, easy.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, that was a huge mind opener for me back in the day, and I've utilized it ever since. So thank you very much for that.
Good. We will thank all teachers of mine. They must have thought I was like just some sort of simian, heavy metal kid or something when they would try to explain it to me, and they probably saw my eyes all cross-eyed like, "What? You can harmonize every note in a scale?" And Yeah, I remember those early days when people would be explaining modes. It'd just be like my eyes would glass over, there'd be a little bit of saliva drooling down, and it's and now when I explain it, I'm like, why can't they get this? Because they're looking at me the way I looked at my teacher back in the day. But it's like one of those things where, I was describing this to someone the other day. There's like this weird gap that exists between the brain of someone that likes to play along with records and really get into the nuances of the grit between different vibratos. Say, listen to Hendrix versus, Cream or a Clapton, or mess around with some Jimmy Page stuff, or whatever the case may be, versus someone who's like, I've got to learn this standard. I'm going to learn how to play a chord melody over it, and I'm going to know how to play over the changes. It's just something has to happen at some point for that other side, and vice versa. You know what I mean? It's like you hear guys that are great jazz players, and they're like, well, anyone can, if you know how to play jazz, you can play anything. Well, your ear is obviously can digest all that stuff, but then when they do it, it sounds. Not always, there are the exceptions, but a lot of times it's really square because the brain doesn't reconcile itself to that. You know what I mean? It's just kind of bizarre. Oh, yeah. When I was in high school and I was learning all these things, I had a book, and of course there's a lot of hanging out. So there's always friends in the room and you're playing music and stuff like that. And I remember from some little party in the room, we decided that I had to be reminded what my true nature was. And so the guys opened up my book. They went like, 100 pages deep in the creative book, and they wrote, remember to always sound like, a rock guitar player. It was just like, remember, don't lose yourself down the jazz rabbit hole or something like that. And we just laughed about it. And of course I didn't think about it. And then 6 months later, I'm flipping the pages, writing down strange, obtuse music ideas. And there's that note to myself. Remember, your true nature. You like distortion. You like to make noises, play with your teeth,
right. Get
down on your knees. And it's like, that's right. That's who I am. All this other stuff is good, but I'm just a rock and roll kid, and it's kind of like what you were saying is you have to remind yourself sometimes that, the true nature of yourself, I think, is the deepest well with the most amount of good stuff in, and that people really want to experience. Our job is to play music for people, lift people's spirits up, and to accompany them with our music through all the stages of life. But you can't do that if you're faking it. I right. truly believe it. I mean, it's just terrible. And so, yeah, when you hear someone who really is a jazzer and he's trying to play rock, it's not the same. And if you got a rocker and all of a sudden he starts getting brainy, you can tell, like, he worked that one out one day.
Exactly.
And he said, hey, look at this. I can do Lydian dominant. Check this out, So.
Well, it's amazing because, one of the things that I loved about Hendrix's playing so much is that he seemed to earball changes instinctively. You know what I mean? He just, when things would get weird, it's like like in different versions of Little Wing or so on and so forth, although he wasn't formally trained, it's like he heard the changes but did so in his way. I mean, just talk a little bit about what Hendrix meant to you in terms of how it shaped you, not only as a guitar player, but as a composer and that kind of stuff. Because for me, people ask me, who's your favorite guitar player? I always say Hendrix, or who's your main influence? I always say Hendrix because it's just, even to this day, I listen to it and I get something new out of it, which is weird because, I'm 54 now and he died when he was 27. You think I'd be over it, but it's.
No. Wow. I almost want to break it down into levels, because we're both musicians, we can speak in a deeper sense about Hendrix and his musicianship. There's the obvious thing, which is, I heard him when I was a kid. I had no idea about the architecture of music at all. I just loved music. Even though I was a drummer at the time, I still was basically an unformed human being. Right. And the music came over me. It sort of changed my DNA instantly. I loved it. I didn't know why. I didn't intellectualize. I was just a little kid, and I thought, this is the greatest noise I've ever heard in my life, whoever this guy is. Then I saw the picture, and I said, well, these three guys here are the coolest three guys I've ever seen in my life. They don't look like all the grown-ups on my street, so therefore they are the coolest people in the planet,
Right.
And so, hook, line, and sinker, that was the end of that. Then, as I started to play guitar years later, I realized the enormous difference between the way Hendrix played and the way other people played. And he had that sort of virtuoso, he came off as a virtuoso, but yet you could not hear or detect any element of that had gone on. And so for some reason, like, you hear other people play at the time, I remember there was a lot of fusion going on. Right. And the difference between fusion solos and exercises were, they were pretty damn close.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of demonstration going on in certain styles of music where people would demonstrate their technical prowess. I never heard Hendrix do that. He just never played a scale and exercise. He just never did any of that. And yet he created music that everybody responded to as legitimate music. It's actually a hard thing to do, to be taken seriously as a legitimate musician, someone who can create music that you love to listen to, dance to, do all sorts of crazy things to. It's not really about demonstrations. And you know what it's like. You come across them all the time. Some folks are really well-studied, good musicians, good people, and they're really good at demonstrating. When it comes to like moving your soul or your heart, it's not their thing. Then there are other people who can barely get around the guitar, and yet they are masters at moving people with their musical expression. And I haven't figured out how to even talk about it, let alone how I would teach it or try to grapple with it myself. I do know, though, that it's, for me personally, it's pointless to try to prepare 100% and think to myself like, I've practiced and therefore I will achieve, Right. It never works out that way for me. It's because when I walk out on stage, I'm kind of like freaking out right until that first step on the stage, and then I'm somebody else. Somehow something else takes over and I just get into improvising. But I can't count on my practicing to get through the gig because I'm just not that kind of a person. Right? So, but again, Jimmy would play, and as you said, he'd navigate through changes, but not like he studied Bird or Coltrane or something like that. You don't hear any of those licks.
Right.
You just don't hear it. Even when he was saying, like, I'm just going to play you some Buddy Guy right now, he still didn't completely, copy Buddy's style. He
right.
could somehow just sound like it was like a new thought, like, hey, I got an idea. Why don't I just play some Buddy Guy for you guys? Never did it before. Here it goes.
Right.
And then, pure magic, and then, I mean, we could talk for hours about the fact that he was using a Stratocaster, none of this locking tuner stuff. Spoiled kids with all this stuff here. No master volumes, and you can't see over there. XFX 3,
right?
Signature 12 modes and 4 channels. I mean, really, do I need all that? I don't know. Hendrix had a Stratocaster, no tuners.
Right.
It was all this, right? And maybe fuzz face or something like that. He's in 2 or 3 Marshalls, one just like that back there. 1969 100 watt head. Those
Delicious.
things are a beast.
Oh, yeah.
When you play it, you find out like if there's magic in your fingers right away when you plug into one of those. It tells you right away. It kind of puts you in your place, really, in a very loud way too.
Yes.
And that's every time I hear Machine Gun, I just go like, it's amazing. I've got a really huge photograph in the next room of the sound check from the Fillmore East, the night that the band of Gypsies recorded and did those 4 shows. And its rim is up behind them, so it's all ladders and lights. There's stools. There's like two monitors. Drum set is teeny, right? There's like dual Showmans and Marshall heads everywhere, all with funny cables going into all the inputs, all wired up together. But it's just 3 guys. It's the afternoon. They've showed up to see if they can play.
Right.
And I go, wow, that little setup over there, bare bones, old school as old school can get. And they turned out Machine Gun.
Right.
Holy crap. I mean, oh my God. So it kind of puts you in your place. But I mean, he was such a master, and I can't imagine what it was like. Just what was going on in his brain. Why did he think he could do that? I'm so happy he thought he could.
Right.